Chapter 1. Question. What's in the space between? The answer? The divine matrix. Modern science is hot on the trail of solving one of the greatest mysteries of all time. You may not hear about it in the evening news, you probably won't see it on the front page of USA Today or the Wall Street Journal. Yet nearly 70 years of research in an area of science known as the new physics is pointing to a conclusion that we cannot escape. That powerful conclusion is the second key to unlocking the mystery of the divine matrix. It simply states that everything in our world is connected to everything else. Science is simply a language to describe the natural world and our relationship to that world and the universe beyond. And it's only one language. There have been other languages such as alchemy and spirituality, for example, that were used long before modern science ever came along. While they might not have been sophisticated, they certainly worked. And I'm always amazed when people ask me the question, what did we do before science? Did we know anything about our world? Well, the answer is certainly yes, a resounding yes. We knew a lot about the world, and we knew what we knew in a way that worked so well that it provided an entire framework for understanding everything from the origin of life to why we become sick to what we do when we get sick, and how to calculate the cycles of the sun, the moon, and the stars. While this kind of knowing was obviously not described in technical language like we use today, it did a pretty good job of providing a useful story of how things work and why things are as they are. So good, in fact, that civilization existed for over 5,000 years without ever relying upon science, at least science as we know it today. Science and the scientific era are typically acknowledged as beginning in the 1600s. It was in July of 1687 that Isaac Newton formalized the mathematics that seemed to describe our everyday world, and he published his classic work entitled Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica, which loosely translates to Mathematic Principles of Natural Philosophy. Well, for over 200 years, Newton's observations of nature were the foundation of the scientific field that we now call physics. And along with Maxwell's theories of electricity and magnetism in the late 1800s, Einstein's theories of relativity from the early 1900s, this classical physics has been tremendously successful in explaining the large-scale things that we see in our world. Things like the movement of planets and galaxies and apples falling from trees. It's actually served us so well that we were able to calculate the orbits for our satellites. We even put a man on the moon based on this kind of thinking. During the 1900s, however, something changed. Advances in science revealed a place in nature where Newton's laws just don't seem to work. The very small world of the atom. Before then, we simply didn't have the technology to peer into this subatomic world or to watch the way atoms behave during the birth of a star in a distant galaxy, for example. In both realms, the largest and the smallest, scientists began to see things that could not be explained by the traditional physics, by Newton's physics. A new kind of physics had to be developed with rules that would explain the exceptions in these extremes, hence the birth of quantum physics. The definition of quantum physics is found in the name itself. The word quantum is defined as a discrete quantity of electromagnetic energy. It's the very stuff our world is made of. So quantum physics is really about the study of everything in our world, what it's made of. We reduce it to its most elementary essence. Quantum physicists soon found that what looks to us like the solid world really isn't so solid at all. Maybe the following analogy will help us to understand why. When the local movie theater projects a moving image on the screen in front of us, we know that the story we're seeing is an illusion. The romance, the tragedy that tug at our heartstrings are actually the result of many still individual pictures being flashed very quickly, one after another, to create the sense or the illusion of a continuous story. So while our eyes do see single pictures frame by frame, our brain merges those single pictures into what we perceive as this nonstop movement. Well, quantum physicists believe that our world works much in the same way. For instance, what we see is the football touchdown or the triple axel of a figure skater on a Sunday afternoon sports program, in quantum terms, is actually a series of individual events that happen very quickly and very closely together. Similarly to the way that many images strung together make a movie look so real, life actually occurs as brief tiny bursts of light, and these bursts are called quanta. The quanta of life happens so quickly that unless our brain is trained to operate differently, like in some forms of meditation, it simply averages all of the pulses together to create the continuous action that we see as the Sunday sports. So quantum physics, then, is the study of things that happen on the very small scale of the forces that underlie our physical world. The difference in the way that the quantum world and the everyday world seem to work has created two schools of thought among scientists in contemporary physics, the classical and the quantum. And each school has its own theories to support it. So the great challenge of our time has been to marry these two very different ways of thinking into a single view of the universe, a view that we call the unified field theory. To do so requires the existence of something that fills what we think of as empty space. But what could that be? What's in the space between? The science fiction classic Contact is one of my all-time favorite movies. Early in the plot, the main character, Dr. Arroway, played by Jodie Foster, asked her father the question that becomes the tagline for the rest of the movie. The question is simply this: are we alone in the universe? Her father's answer becomes her touchstone for things that are true for her for the rest of her life. When she finds herself in a particularly vulnerable situation, such as opening herself to romance or trusting her experience in a distant universe where she's been transported, her father's words become the guiding principle of her beliefs. His answer is simply that if we are alone in the universe, it seems like an awful waste of space. Well, in much the same way, if we truly believe that the space between any two things is empty, then it seems like a tremendous waste of space as well. Scientists believe that over 90% of the universe is what they call missing and appears to us as empty space. Well, that means that of the entire universe as we know it, only 10% has anything in it. Do you really believe that the 10% of creation we occupy is all there is? What's in the empty space that we think of as empty? If it is really empty, then there's a big question that must be answered. How can the waves of energy that carry everything from our cell phone calls to the reflected light that carries the words from the pages of a book to your eyes travel from one place to another? Just as the water in a pond carries ripples away from the place where a stone is tossed into it, something must exist that carries the vibrations of life from one point to another. And for this to be true, however, we must upset one of the key tenets of modern science, the belief that space is empty. When at last we can answer the question of what the space is made of, we will have taken a great step toward understanding ourselves and our relation to the world around us. The question, as we shall see, is as old as we are. The answer, as we'll see as well, has probably been with us all along. From the Aboriginal history etched into the cliff walls of Australia, now believed to be over 20,000 years old, to the temples of ancient Egypt and the rock art of the American desert Southwest, our sense that we are somehow connected to the universe, our world, and one another is a constant that's always been with us. And while that belief appears to be stronger than ever today, precisely what it is that does the connecting continues to be the subject of controversy and debate. For us to be connected, there must be something that connects us, from poets and philosophers to scientists and those who seek their answers beyond the accepted ideas of their day. Our sense has been that within the emptiness of what we call space, something is actually there. 19th century physicist Conrad Finagle posed the obvious question regarding the significance of space itself. He asked us to consider what would happen if you took away the space from between matter. Everything in the universe would scrunch together, he said, into a volume no longer than a dust speck. Space is what keeps everything from happening in the same place, he said. Well, in the simplicity of just a few words, Finagle describes the obvious. There must be something, some stuff that lives between all of the other stuff, something that connects everything on the one hand, while keeping it all from happening at the same time on the other hand. The pioneering anthropologist Louis Leakey once said, "Without an understanding of who we are, we cannot truly advance." Now, I believe there's a lot of truth in this statement. The way we have seen ourselves in the past worked well enough to get us where we are today. Now it's time to open the door for a new view of ourselves, one that allows for an even greater possibility. It may be that our reluctance to accept just what it means to have space occupied by an intelligent force And for us to be part of that space has been the greatest stumbling block in our understanding of who we are and how the universe really works. In the 20th century, modern science may have discovered what's inside of empty space, a field of energy that's different from any other form of energy we've ever known. Just as Newton's ether suggested, this energy appears to be everywhere always and to have existed since the very beginning of time. In the 1928 lecture, Albert Einstein said, "According to the general theory of relativity, space without ether is unthinkable. For in such space, there not only would be no propagation of light, but also no possibility of existence for standards of space." End of quote. As we mentioned earlier, Max Planck stated that because the field exists, it suggests that intelligence is responsible for our physical world. Planck said that we must assume behind this force the existence of a conscious and intelligent mind. He concluded that this mind is the matrix of all matter. The tale of Einstein's lion. Whether we talk about the cosmic space between distant stars and galaxies, or the microspace between the bands of energy that form the atom, from textbooks to telescopes, we typically think of space between things as being empty. And when we say that something is empty, we typically mean that nothing, absolutely nothing at all, exists in that space. Well, without doubt, to the untrained eye, what we call space certainly looks empty to us. But how empty can it really be? When we really think about it, what would it mean to live in a world where the space between things was truly void of anything? First, we know that to find such a place in nature is probably impossible for one reason. As the saying goes, nature abhors the emptiness of a vacuum. If we could somehow magically transport ourselves to such a place, however, what would it look like? Well, to begin with, it would be a very dark place. While we could turn on a flashlight, for example, the light from that flashlight could not travel anywhere because there would be nothing for the light waves to travel through. It would be as if we'd thrown a stone into the pond with no water and we're looking for ripples on the surface from the impact. The stone would hit the bottom, whether or not the water was there. But there would be no waves, as the waves that would normally radiate from the impact would have no medium to travel through. Well, it's for precisely the same reason our hypothetical world would also be very quiet. Sound must travel through some kind of medium to perpetuate itself. In fact, almost any kind of energy as we know it today, from the motion of wind to the heat of the sun, could not exist because the electrical fields and the magnetic fields and the radiant fields and even the fields of gravity would not have the same meaning in a world where the space was truly empty. Fortunately, we don't have to speculate about what such a world would be like, because the space that surrounds us is anything but empty. Regardless of what we call it or how science and religion define it, it's clear that there is a force. It's a field, it's a presence that is what's called the great net that connects everything in creation and links us to a higher power of a greater world. Early in the 20th century, Albert Einstein made reference to the mysterious force that he was certain exists in what we see as the universe around us. Nature shows us only the tail of the lion, he said, suggesting that there's something more to what we see as reality, even if we can't see it from our cosmic vantage point. Through a beauty and eloquence that's typical of Einstein's view of the universe, he elaborated on this analogy of the cosmos. He said, "I don't doubt that the lion belongs to that tail, even though he cannot at once reveal himself because of his enormous size." In later writings, Einstein went on to say that regardless of who we are or what our role in the universe might be, we're all subject to a greater power. Human beings, he said, vegetables or cosmic dust, we all dance to what he called a mysterious tune intoned in the distance by an invisible piper. It's with this declaration of an intelligence underlying creation, Planck earlier described the energy of Einstein's lion and shook the traditional foundation of the entire discipline of physics. In doing so, he ignited a flame of controversy that continues to burn hotter than ever today. In the fire of that flame, the old ideas of what our world is made of and the reality of the universe, for that matter, have flown right out the door. The matrix appears to be the container that holds time, providing for a continuity between the choices of our present and the experiences of our future. So regardless of what we call it or how science and religion define it, it's clear there's something out there. There's a force, it's a field, it's a presence that is the great net that links us with one another, our world, and very probably a greater presence. If we can truly grasp what these three principles tell us about our relationship to one another, then the events of our lives take on an entirely new meaning. We become participants rather than victims of forces that we can't see and don't understand. To be in such a place is where our empowerment really begins.